So on to Cathy. Cathy is going to talk to us today about opportunity through online learning, improving student access, participation and success in higher education. So Cathy is a conjoint associate professor in the School of Humanities and Social Science at the University of Newcastle. She's also the 2016 Equity Fellow and a 2017 Visiting Research Fellow at the NCSEHE. So that's the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. Cathy has many years' experience in developing and managing strategies to improve student success and retention in higher education, with her research and publications focusing on the experience of mature age, first and family and online students. So all those atypical students who are actually becoming a very large part of our everyday cohort. Cathy's work with the Open Universities Australia between 2011 and 2014 developed her particular interest in researching the online student experience and the ways in which to improve the outcomes for diverse cohorts. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Cathy's work, but certainly I've been reading her work and looking at the publications that she's got, and they're very, very pragmatic, very practical, both at the individual unit level but also at the institutional level. So personally I'm looking forward to hearing you, and welcome very much to Sunburn. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Just going to put the record on.
I did it.
Oh, you've done it already?
I've done it. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. I'm going to be presenting the findings of an Equity Fellowship research project that I did through 2016 and completed it at the end of March this year. And I'm very keen to disseminate the findings because I guess I'm pretty passionate about trying to improve outcomes for students who have certain hurdles to overcome, and studying online is not an easy task at all. Just before I start, most of you, I'm assuming that many of you at least have experience in teaching online. Could I have a show of hands as to who? Okay, great. Yeah, quite a lot of you. What about in other roles? Is anyone in a role of supporting students in any other way online? Yep. So, okay, learning design, ed tech, okay, and what about administration? Yep, unit coordination, course coordination. Disability advisors, great. Okay, so from the student support background, that's fantastic. Good. So there's a great range here today, and I hope that all of you will be able to take something from this. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background, there were 3 Equity Fellowships offered for 2016 by the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. There are another 3 happening this year as well. So what I proposed to do was to investigate engagement, teaching and support strategies for domestic undergraduate online students in Australia. I also wanted to look at the Open University UK because they've been doing this for such a long time. So what I did is I conducted qualitative interviews across a range of higher ed institutions which offered online undergraduate studies, and what I was really aiming to do was to seek that combined wisdom of practitioners. Liz said before that my research tends to be practical and pragmatic, and that's very much where I come from because my background is in social work, counselling, student support management, managing student support services, and I came late into the research area mainly because I got so interested in the stories of students who struggle so much to even be at university, let alone stay at university. So I wanted that very practical voice of wisdom from people who are actually doing the work, and asking them what's most important to help these students stay and succeed. And from that I aim to develop national guidelines for improving student outcomes in online learning, which came out of the research, and there are copies of those guidelines on your tables, and I will go through them during this presentation as well. So first of all, why I look at online learning, and I'm sure by the show of hands of people involved in teaching and supporting and working with online students, I'm sure that I'm preaching to the converted. But it certainly does have a critical and growing place in widening access and participation in higher ed for very diverse student groups. Students from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented at university are in fact much more strongly represented in online studies. And of course that's particularly where there are entry qualifications that are not a barrier. So open entry, of course, through something like OUA and the OU in the UK, but other universities as well that might not often offer open entry will nevertheless still offer things like mature age entry programs and so on, open access pathways. So where the pathways into university are made a little bit broader, then you tend to get a lot more of students from those historically underrepresented backgrounds, and that applies very much to that online space. And what's interesting is a recent discussion paper by the Department of Education showed that the number of external students is in fact rising faster in Australia than that of internal students. So there are still fewer completely external students, but the proportion is rising faster. Just to give you an idea of the proportion of percentage of fully external online students starting through 2010, I don't know if you can read that, it was about 11.5% in 2010. We're now up from 2016, which is just the first half of the year's figures, that the second half of the year's figures aren't released yet. We're pushing closer towards 14%. So it is growing, and it continues to grow every year. And these are students who are enrolled in a fully external mode, and of course nowadays that's all online. So I guess I'm keen to sort of hear from you, and you might want to talk among yourselves a bit first about this, but I guess I'm curious to know from you, in your experience, what do you think motivates online students to begin their studies? Why do people choose to study online, particularly when perhaps they haven't had prior experience of university? And at your universities and in your units and courses, what are some of the particular features of the online undergraduate student cohort that you encounter? And what types of challenges are they likely to face, and the impact of these challenges on retention, progression and completion of degrees. So maybe you could just share some ideas at your tables to begin with, just perhaps find out what you do, where you come from, and what experience you have of these students and your thoughts about some of these questions, and then I'll just take some broader questions. Just take a couple of minutes. stop you there. Sorry, you're probably engrossed in interesting conversations. Maybe I could just get a few thoughts from around the room of what came up in your discussion about some of these questions. Anyone want to start the ball rolling about the sorts of things you were talking about? Yeah?
Convenience.
Convenience.
Students with mental health challenges who can't, or physical disabilities who can't leave the house.
Yeah, so students with disabilities, and often mental health disabilities, perhaps mobility issues too, but there is quite a high proportion of students with some sort of mental health psychological disability. Yeah, that's right. Other thoughts?
Delivering choice.
Sorry?
Delivering choice.
Delivering choice.
We have work responsibilities, carer, and for me it was also bridging a geographical.
Okay, so there's two issues there, isn't there? There's the sort of geographical issues of not being able to get to a campus, but also, and this is the case more broadly, having other responsibilities that don't enable you to have the time to go to a campus and study. Yeah, whether it's employment, caring duties, all those sorts of things. And what about the challenges that they face? How does this impact on them? Yeah.
So the main challenge is to stay engaged without a face-to-face community. A lot of students now setting up Facebook sites.
Yes.
Yes. But also challenges that I came across with students who were coming back for the first time in a long time is just the overwhelming technology of just everyone's a leader of the online student management systems.
Yeah, so the connecting with other students and the technology challenges can be huge. That's right, because it's also different if someone hasn't been involved in using that sort of technology. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think in terms of challenges, you were saying they do it because they've got kids, because they've got work, because they've got everything, and so fitting it in and time management
Yes.
is difficult.
Yes, fitting it in, that's right. And of course that's one of the issues in itself. They're trying to fit it in when they've got so much else going on. That's right. Yeah. Yes, so just being very unfamiliar with how university operates. And I should say that's not restricted to international students, that there are many, many domestic students starting university who don't have a clue how university operates. If no one in their family's been to university before, how are they to know? And online it's much harder. There's not that person there that you can just go and ask or put your hand up. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Just two, really. One, I think confidence is a big challenge for someone who's returning to study anyway.
Yep.
And particularly if you can't talk to someone,
Yes.
or get some insight as to perhaps how you're travelling.
Yes.
So I think confidence is a big issue. The other thing we were talking about was how restrictive universities are in terms of their policy frameworks. There's been some recent work around assessment policies in particular.
Yes.
But I think just generally, we're the ones who actually have to get programs, so to speak.
Yes.
And be much more accommodating to students. Assuming we actually want to do a good job on education. If we don't, we just want to be, the same as we've always been, then by all means, we just keep doing that. But I think what's happening in the broader marketplace around online education is that there are institutions who are going to come into play and who are going to offer that flexibility and who are going to be much more understanding about where the online student needs support.
Yeah, thank you. You've raised a couple of really good points. That whole confidence issue is huge. Also, as you say, the institutional policies and procedures, and I came across that so much from the people I talked with, as I say, the people actually doing the work, the frustration around, we just don't have the flexibility around policies and processes to help these students. So, yeah. Thank you. Yes?
I think many of our students have this impression that online, it's quite easy.
Yes.
I call this, they think it's a license to disengage.
Okay, a license to disengage.
Or basically they say, piles up after a while?
All too easy to procrastinate when you're studying online, isn't it? I mean, we know that students procrastinate anyway, so online it's even worse. And I think you're absolutely right that many students have absolutely no idea what it's going to involve and how much work it's going to be. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that. We might move on then, but it's good to hear we're sort of all on the same wavelength here. I just want to spend just a few minutes, a couple of slides, just giving you a bit of background to a couple of just information about what do online students say in Australia, and just from a couple of research projects that I was involved in over the past few years, which involved qualitative interviews and surveys with online students. So this information is taken from two different surveys, one of which was First in Family online students, which was part of a broader First in Family study led by Sarah O'Shea. So the sorts of reasons they say why they're studying, it's really about wanting a better life, realising their dreams, getting ahead in some way. So just some examples here of, here's Richard, he's partnered, he has a child, he's the only income earner, he's not earning a great deal as a chef, he wants to actually get a better job, it's very much is employment driven. Sometimes people were encouraged, quite a bit later in life by people they worked with, and often good supportive managers, bosses would say to someone, you could do a lot more than this, you're easily capable of doing a university degree. So often it's someone who's never seen themselves as being university material, whatever that means, but they get the encouragement and the support from someone in the workplace. Sometimes it's that catalyst, kids finishing school, kids starting school. Often it's a catalyst for women, probably more often than for men, but this is an example where for a man it was a catalyst. The kids finished school, it was time to have a go at it, change career. And sometimes people who have never had the chance to go to university before know that they were capable of it, and their circumstances change in some way, or they think maybe the time's right. So here's Molly at 62, and she's doing her undergraduate degree. Always very bright at school, but I knew our circumstances would never permit it. So it's often around not having had the opportunity before, not seeing university as something that was for them before, and then something happening in their lives to perhaps help them really start to think this through, and wanting to achieve a better employment outcomes, or just to better their lives in some ways. So the sorts of reasons that they study online, again, these are just snapshots. People talk a lot about studying at my own pace. Well, we all know that you can't study completely your own pace because there are assessment due dates and so on. But I guess what people mean when they talk about this is that I can do my work at 11 o'clock at night while the kids are in bed, or on the weekend when the partner's taken the kids out, or when I'm not at work, or whatever it happens to be. So it's often around working around children, fitting around work. Gemma down here talks about, I couldn't not work, I couldn't afford to not work. And that's the case for probably most of the students who are studying online, really. They can't afford not to work, or they can't leave their children unattended, or they're caring for sick relatives, or whatever it happens to be, or they have a disability and can't manage to get to a campus. So there's always there's some barrier there, some genuine barrier, which means that getting to a campus, sitting through lectures, having that time away from home or from work is not possible. And of course it's that flexibility to be able to fit in work, to be able to fit in other things. So these are very, very busy people. They're fitting an awful lot into their lives. But what it does do, and we all know about the power of education to transform, and these are the sorts of things that they were saying to us in these studies, of seeing themselves, if they were able to start and to persist, they would begin to see themselves as more capable, more confident, more intelligent. I've learned that I can literally do anything I put my mind to, as one comment is. I love what I'm learning, the self-respect, challenge and so on, never too old to learn. So this is really worthwhile stuff. I mean, we hear a lot about employment outcomes and so on, and that's all great and all really important, but it's this other stuff that's so important as well, isn't it, that doesn't get talked about it probably does amongst us, but amongst educators, I'm sure it does a lot. But it doesn't get talked about much in the wider sphere at the moment, anyway, in the sort of society discussion around education. So I mentioned before about this impact of opportunity, and that came across very clearly, particularly in this second study with the first in family students, that it provides the opportunity to study for students who would not otherwise have considered it possible. So the word opportunity came up and up. I never had the opportunity before. This provided the opportunity. I thought, what a great opportunity. So it was the most common word that came up, which was something that I've sort of kept with me throughout further research that I've done. The issue, though, really is that there is the opportunity to start, particularly, as I say, if there are open entry pathways, but how much real opportunity is there to persist and succeed? And that's where we come into problems. The online student cohort does have a much poorer rate of completion of undergraduate degrees compared with on-campus students. So if you look at the cohort analysis data that the Department of Education is doing year by year, they update it in their completion rates of higher ed students, and you look at the mode of study, and the external mode students consistently complete at a much lower rate. So it's over. They're looking at who completes really over a 9-year period, so quite a long period of time. But over that period of time, only 46.6% of external students have been completing, compared with 76.6% for internal on-campus students. And another recent discussion paper that came out from the Australian Higher Education Standards Panel showed that external students are in fact 2.5 times more likely than internal students to withdraw without a qualification. So we do have a problem with this, and again, those of you working in this area, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Please feel free to ask questions as we go, by the way. So I guess I was really concerned about how can we improve the opportunities, how can we widen the access, which is great, and help more online students persist and succeed. So I did these interviews with 151 staff across 16 higher education institutions, 15 in Australia and the OU in the UK. And I spoke to a range of staff, the same kind of range that is in this room now, academic, professional, managerial staff, all of whom in some way were responsible for development, coordination, perhaps delivery of the education itself, primarily in the undergraduate space, or as well as that, perhaps the support, success and retention strategies for online students. So I spoke to a lot of academics, lecturers, unit coordinators, student support staff, student engagement teams, those sorts of disability services, career services, libraries, a whole range of people, and the actual makeup of people I spoke to is all in the full report, and there's the link to the full report is in that handout I gave you. So these are the institutions that were involved. So I was pleased that across the country I managed to get every state and territory. I actually didn't approach the ACT, but they're not doing a lot of online external studies through in the ACT at the moment. But the universities that I asked a lot of universities. I sent out a lot of information and asked a lot of universities if they would be involved. Obviously, the obvious ones to pick were the key OUA providers of online open entry, but also the traditional providers of what was always correspondence degrees, external degrees through Charles Sturt, University of New England, University of Southern Queensland, and so on. So it was such an interesting thing to do, to go around to all these different universities and to pick the brains, really, of people who are far closer to it at the coalface than most of us. And what I asked them in the interviews, I asked them about really what were they doing, what intervention strategies for online students are you or others in your university using which you think might be having a positive impact on access, retention or academic success. I asked if any of this was being evaluated so that I could actually get some, a bit more hard data as well, not just opinions, and I was able to get some, but There's not a lot happening in terms of measuring this stuff, and it's hard to measure, isn't it? Because if as a teacher, an online teacher, you know that something you're doing is working, well, you're not going to want to sort of pilot it and then have others miss out just so that you can say, well, I know it's working. But on the other hand, you see your completion rates go up and you see your retention rate go up. So I was asking for those sorts of things as well. And I asked what else do they think it's important for institutions to do to help them stay and succeed. Sorry about my voice, by the way. I had this cold flu thing that's lingered on. It's gone, but it's left my voice a bit funny, so I sound a bit like an ex-smoker, which I'm not. Okay, so from the research, I sort of pulled out 7 key findings, and I did quite a lot of, I tried to do quite a lot of collaboration in the sense that everyone who participated, is there anyone here who was a participant in my research? Ah, okay, great, thank you. But what I did with all the participants was I sent regular bulletins, and so when I sent the draft findings, the draft guidelines to all of them for comment and feedback, so I would get that feedback loop because I really wanted to make sure I wasn't misrepresenting what I was being told. And you know, you always put your own lens on things, of course, and so I hope from that and incorporated the feedback I got. So I'm as confident as I can be that these findings are an accurate representation of what came out of the data. The way I'm going to present this is I'm just going to introduce each finding by a student quote, and that's from the 2 studies I talked to before, because what I found interesting and very positive really is that what students were saying was being reflected by what staff was saying that students need. So I thought, well, you know, you get a lot of students saying, oh, you know, my teacher in this was fantastic and she really got it. And yes, there are an awful lot of people working with online students who really do get it, and I think this does show it. So the first key finding is about having a strategic whole-of-institution approach. So it's not an add-on, it's not, oh, okay, we'll put that online as well. It's that online is part of our strategy and we need to do it well. Otherwise, you get this sort of thing where online students feeling that universities don't really care about or engage with online students very much. They're a burden they'd rather not have to cater for. So what do the staff say about this? That online education needs to be recognised as core business, not an afterthought. And as you said at the table before, sorry, I don't know your name, Lucy. As Lucy was saying, that if we're going to do it, then we need to do it well, you know, not just as an add-on. So here's an online programs coordinator saying it's not secondary education, and you know, until the whole university thinks like that and it's core business, then we're always pushing things. Another part of that, what staff was saying, is we need to know who these students are. We need to understand their diversity, their needs. We don't get any information as to who's in our classes other than their names in a book. Some universities were providing a bit more demographic information in the form of pie charts and so on, so that, and I mean, we all know universities routinely collect a lot of demographic information, but things like equity groups and so on, that it could be represented in a pie chart so that, and a lot of teachers found this helpful, a lot of academics found this helpful, that they would know, okay, well, in my class I do have a certain number of people who perhaps are coming from a Indigenous background, that they've disclosed disability. They don't know who those students are. The names aren't attached to them. That's up to the student to tell them. But they have a sense of what the kind of demographic makeup of their class is. And of course, very importantly, there's a need to ensure that consistency and quality of online delivery and teaching standards, and that requires teacher training and adequate resourcing. And as one lecturer put it to me, I know they're getting a lesser experience than what my on-campus students are getting, and that concerns me greatly. And if people aren't familiar with teaching online and don't get any help with that and don't get enough resources for it, then they do end up feeling like their online students are not getting this as good an experience. The second finding is about that early intervention, and someone mentioned before about, I think it was you, that students don't know what to expect and often don't understand what's involved. And here's an online student saying, I just felt uni didn't give me that hook to start. You kind of drowned. We need inductions and orientations on how to use stuff. So we don't really want them drowning just in that first few weeks, otherwise, you know, they may as well not start. So the staff were telling me that we need to be telling prospective students what to expect. We need to be more realistic. It's harder doing it online. As institutions, we need to set up realistic expectations. There was a sense of the university often not considering the circumstances of individual prospective students and having a sort of one-size-fits-all sales approach. So one example was if a prospective student makes an inquiry about studying online, if they don't work, if they're not employed, then it's just recommended they do full-time study, without any consideration of what their other circumstances may be. So there's a kind of marketing drive that many staff were feeling a bit frustrated by. Another aspect of this early intervention is providing that early personal contact. So some people within universities, some areas within certain universities were doing things like making welcome calls and so on. So an example from someone in library services who was talking about how students said that receiving a phone call made them feel that sense of belonging because they'd spoken to someone they felt knew them, and this was the university who had a sort of welcome outreach program. Orientation, there's often none or very poor orientation for online students. A lot of effort's put into orientation for on-campus students, but we need to be putting a lot more into for the off-campus students. And just there were some very good examples of what was happening, and there were always little pockets of really good activity happening, just it needs to be more widespread. So an example of one orientation program where they engage in a discussion forum, introduce themselves, get to meet their lecturers during that week. So this was somewhere that was putting a lot of effort into it, and facilitating that academic preparation, because so many students, online students, come in completely academically unprepared. So here's a course coordinator saying we're not doing anywhere near enough to get them to a place where they're comfortable with being in an academic environment. So they need to be able to do things like structure and argument, proofread, all those basic sorts of things. And those of you who teach first years online must find that very, very frustrating. The third finding was this teacher presence, the vital role of the teacher being present. So often what seemed to happen was that many teachers are, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, very overloaded with the work that you have, particularly sessional staff who are told, okay, as well as doing that, just put this online. And they literally haven't got the time to be engaging with these online students as much as they would like to, or they make the time by putting in hours and hours above what they're being paid to do. But if they don't do that, then this sort of thing happens where the online student, checking the discussion board, see if anyone's answered, I was in isolation teaching myself, and the lack of interaction. So what staff were telling me is that students need to feel that the teacher is in that virtual room with them, someone on the other end of the system listening to them. Communication and feedback. You can't communicate enough with online students. And in fact, many online teachers were saying it's more time consuming to really keep up the level of communication that online students need than teaching a face-to-face class. And I can see a few nods around the room here. And what a lot of people were telling me is that the online teacher is the key to building a sense of belonging to a learning community. And having worked at OUA and dealing with students there, you know, that really resonated with me, because we could do all sorts of outreach work at OUA, but what the students were really wanting was that connection, or what really had more of an impact was the connection with their online teacher. So it's about being the face of the university, that human connection point, and the instructor is everything to the students, as one person put it. The fourth finding is about design, and again, many people made this point that we need to design for online, not retrofit things to, and disability people will be very much in tune with this. And as the students say, what works in person is not the same as online. I thought it would be more tailor-made for it than what it is. So what staff were saying to me is we need to be designing completely differently. Thinking about distance learning or online learning is a different animal to the face-to-face course. And in doing so, then there are opportunities to really engage and support through the content and delivery. And just examples, opportunities for students to engage with the content online, teacher presence in blogs and discussion boards, strengthening interaction among the students, with the discussion being that centrepiece of the classroom experience. And that doesn't happen unless it's designed appropriately. The fifth finding was about this contact, this communication, contact and connecting. And here's an online student saying it's about not having that relationship with people. It would be nice for them to connect more with us students. So again, that sense of lack of connection. So a lot of staff were saying to me that, and a lot of places were doing this, again it was happening a bit on a piecemeal basis, is about reaching out to students through a framework of interventions. Reaching out to students when they may be falling by the wayside, having some difficulties. Also reaching out to them with welcome calls and so on, and then keeping up the sort of contact and connection along that journey. And I think what's really important is that what a lot of people were saying to me is that it does make a difference. So I think we need to know that it does make a difference. And just one example, I've been able to get my non-completer range right down. The unit I've just finished, it's down to 4%. It's really low. I've been able to get my fail rate down to 1%. And this was a course coordinator who had instituted a range of ways of contacting, connecting, making sure that teachers were very present in that teaching space. And of course, hand in hand with this contact and connection is the role of learning analytics. And here's a student saying, it's nice to hear another human being's voice, and you just think, wow, how did you know today was the day I really needed to have someone check in? Well, of course, learning analytics can help enormously with that it can help to personalise interventions. It can even help to personalise the curriculum. And as one a learning tech manager put it to me, as students now, especially if they're familiar with, and most people I know, no matter what their age, familiar with some of the aspects of social media, they do expect to be remembered. They don't expect to be sent stuff that's not relevant to them. They don't expect to be told that car park B is closed this week, or the cafeteria is only opening for these hours. They don't want those messages, and it says to them, we don't know who you are, and we don't really care very much either. So they expect to be remembered, they expect to be known that they are at least online students, and analytics and other tools will help academics and teachers keep up with that. It also helps to predict who needs that extra help and support, brings that data together based on predictive models, predicting student risk, using that student data to form that model, and then using that to inform student interventions, pushing data through these models, and then being able to contact the students who are perhaps predicted to be most likely at risk. And the seventh finding is about collaboration, and this came across as hugely important. Universities, higher education institutions tend to be a bit siloed, really, don't they? I mean, everyone's busy, and they're big places. We work in big bureaucracies, so it can be very hard when you're over here doing your lovely interventions, but what you don't know is someone is over here doing these, and it needs to be joined up a bit more. So it's all about delivering support at the point of need. So here's a student who says they came back to us and said, you all need to redo your referencing for the next assessment, which was another essay. They gave us no tutorial or anything. With collaboration, all these things can happen. So it's about academic and support staff working together, and professional staff in all the areas. So student advisors in schools was one example, where there was a student advisor network across the university working within the schools. Academic support can be embedded within the curriculum, and here's an example of level 1 programs include learning how to learn. So rather than it's over here, outside of the discipline base, it's actually embedded. So working with academic skills people to embed that sort of support. And of course technology support. Someone before mentioned the technology difficulties. They need assistance in being able to navigate where to find information, what all this is about, discussion forums, submitting assignments. And that support, if it's embedded within the curriculum and provided at the point of need, is going to have much more impact. So I'm going to stop there, and because they're the 7 key findings, and then from that there were 10 guidelines developed. But I'm really curious to know your thoughts so far, and you know whether these sort of findings resonate with you, whether they're applicable to your work, and what's happening in your institutions in relation to online students to help them stay and succeed. And whether you think these sorts of findings have a place within your institutions, perhaps to help influence some practices. So what are we, quarter to 10? So maybe I'll just take some questions, and then after that we just might take a little break and just to let everyone stretch their legs and so on. So your thoughts on that, perhaps, just generally speaking. Do these findings resonate with you? What are your thoughts about them? Any examples from your own institutions of things that you are doing, things that you're not doing, things you should be doing, you'd like to be doing, or that you individually are doing that you're finding is helpful? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I've been a student online, whilst working.
Yeah.
Online courses as a lecturer online. It all sounds fabulous, but the amount of time it takes just to type individual email to an individual person.
Yeah. It is.
And also, when I was a student online doing law, you could see how haggard the people teaching looked, because I was 7:30 doing their maths tutorials.
Yes.
Hardly anybody turned up to anyway.
Yes.
It's just a huge effort. Or you're paying a dedicated group to manage these people as well, which is a vast extra expense.
It is, and it is hard, and it is an extra expense. I think, though, what a lot of people would point out to me when I was doing the research is that online students pay exactly the same fees as on-campus students. So, theoretically, the resources should be there to provide them with more than they're getting. And I think, too, that the point was often raised about the design, that if the course is well designed, then there shouldn't be as much need for lecturers to be doing individual emails to students. There would always be the case for that in some occasions. But if the design is right, then the course content and delivery is engaging enough to be able to keep them involved without so much of the individual stuff. And as you say, having dedicated groups, whether it's in student support services or whatever, to provide that other outreach. And some universities are doing that quite successfully, and working closely with academic staff to make sure they do that outreach work to those students that academics feel particularly need it. But I take your point, it's not easy, and I think that's where so much more thought needs to go into how do we deliver online rather than let's just deliver it online. I think, that's starting to happen a bit more with particularly some of the universities that have come new to online, and they're looking around and saying, okay, well, we don't want to make the same mistake, so let's put a whole strategy in behind it, and that's interesting. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think that, as we said, are very helpful, and they actually follow the student life cycle more holistically. So,
can you stand up?
I wonder if this works.
Sorry, I'm also getting over the cold that we've been. I am an ex-smoker.
I don't know how to turn that on.
It doesn't matter. I've got a loud voice when I'm asked to. I forget what I was going to say, but hello everyone. Okay, the whole idea, you've got students coming in, there's a class, a learning environment where you've got a lot of work being done, very switched on people, actually, hello, thank you, actually looking at the design, the validation of the actual learning assessments, the outcomes, the moderation after the fact assessment, that sort of thing, reliability. But that concept of orientation, I don't know what all universities do, but this is something where we can clearly work together on, I think. Looking at how we actually bring them into the fold. We've got marketing to the students, and they come in and then they just have to figure it out themselves. We give them our wonderful communication teams. We love them so much. They're so helpful, but they strip the life out of the communications. It's drilled down to the key half a dozen points, but they're not the key half a dozen points and necessarily a newly engaging online student would consider to be valid or important or even understand or engage with. So how do we work together on that to look at the whole orientation, getting them in and getting them hitting the ground running and keen and enthusiastic and knowing who to go to, even knowing the questions to ask. They don't even know what they don't know yet. I think that's one of our opportunities collectively. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thank you. I thought I had this working. I turned it off and on again. Oh, it's on now. So I can pass this around. Anyone else got any other thoughts about what's happening in your space or? Thanks.
I was teaching, just building on your comment, teaching last semester both online, an online cohort as well as an on-campus cohort, and that was particularly interesting because. And it was a deacon, so it was very well positioned with online, had some good systems in place for orientation and processes for orientation. We had to do a 3-minute video, and this was the minimum online presence. Those kinds of things were really well supported. But the workload, trying to manage the 2 different cohorts, it was almost like 2 different subjects. It was just interesting, and others may have experienced it too, but you're preparing for the classes, and as well you're doing little soundbite sort of videos, trying to differentiate. Now, what's useful here for the online that might be different from those where you're teasing a lot more out. I found it quite challenging, but also a good learning experience because it's helped me think. Okay, what I do differently next time, but yeah, to really. To try and encapsulate some of the core things that the online students needed that I didn't really give them because I was new to it, and also it was I was still in that on-campus mode. So, and now I'm teaching at ACU all online, and that feels like a breeze in comparison. Yeah, well, that's being simplistic. It's not really a breeze, but it feels. At least I can focus on it and really pay good attention to it the best I can.
Now that fits in with what a lot of people said to me, that it's a different headspace.
It is a different headspace.
And it needs to be recognised as such.
It does,
It's not enough to just put up the PowerPoint slides or audio recording of the lecture and say, okay, that's enough for the online students. Because that's not going to be an engaging experience. So a lot of people are doing exactly what you did, putting in a lot of their own time to create much more engaging content for the online students. But like you, often having no training, no extra information about this, no one to sort of say to you, this is, you know...
Hopefully my colleagues didn't even see them, because it would have been embarrassing. but I think there's one other little point I was going to make, but I lost it. Probably doesn't matter. Oh, that's right. My first thought when I was struggling with it, this feels really didactic. Are we going back to this transmission model? It felt really odd after all the work we put into trying to encourage lectures to be interactive and much more engaged with adult learners and adult learning principles. So that's what it felt like. But I think if you can think it through a bit more, you can do it differently.
Thank you. But you need to be resourced appropriately to do it.
You do.
There we go. Thank you.
You mentioned that you picked Open Universities UK because of how long they had been doing it. So was there anything to be learned from them, or anything that they were doing different or better in comparison with the Australian universities?
Yeah, look, they do some wonderful stuff at the Open University in the UK, and there are some universities doing some of that here in different pockets, but the main thing that's impressive is this whole of institution strategy. I mean, having said that, it's all that they do. You know, they are they are dealing with external students right around the country, and they have some international students as well. And they've been doing that for a long time. But the amount of effort that is put into the consistency, the quality, there's just such a framework around it. As one of the senior management staff said to me, nothing is left to chance, and nothing is. So that every course that an open university student will do is of a very high quality in terms of design, and there are very clear standards around the teaching, and they're all sessional staff all around the country, but they are, and I'm sure that it's not perfect, but certainly there is a lot more effort given to professional development, to monitoring, making sure that there are certain guidelines for those teachers, and that there are certain principles and certain requirements, I guess, of the number of times they contact. They're always sort of piloting things too, and there's that whole cycle of continuous quality improvement. So yes, there's a lot there and I've referenced in the full report quite a number of articles and so on that talks about what they're doing, and when I go through the guidelines I'll mention some of that as well. Yeah.
So then do you see that as the way forward? Universities breaking up, like how Swinburne University is Swinburne Online, and now RMIT is going into a separate entity with RMIT Online. Yeah. Do you see that as a way forward?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't really mind how it's done, as long as much effort is put into online as needs to be. So, and I think that people who teach online, sometimes they also like to have to be able to do some teaching face to face. So, yeah, I think certainly the way in which Swinburne Online and RMIT Online and so on are going, it does enable them to set up a very clear strategy. On the other hand, Flinders is introducing is broadening its online offerings, moving into the online undergraduate space, and they're not doing it, to my knowledge anyway, they weren't when I spoke to them, as a separate sort of entity in that way, but they do have a very clear strategy, and they have, so I think it can be an arm of the university, but as long as it's core business, however it's done, I think that's the important thing. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Comments? Yeah. Go here and then there.
Two comments. One, I'm wondering also about our workload allocation models. Hate to throw that into the conversation.
No, that's mentioned in the full report. That is discussed. Yeah. Yes, because that's a big issue.
It's a massive issue. Yeah. I think one of the big challenges for us is to think about this and understand this from a student perspective. And I know, Cathy, a lot of your findings really, and even just using the student voice, I thought was terrific in really saying, from a student perspective, this is what they see. I understand the issues about workload, absolutely, but I think it's partly because of the way we've set up things like the workload allocation model. And so a student pays thousands of dollars for an online learning experience. It has to be equivalent. I mean, that's actually a requirement of the standards, but we have to understand what equivalent means. And yes, on the face of it, it looks like quite a lot of work, and it is quite a lot of work to help students learn properly. Anyway, that was just one comment. The second thing that I just wanted to raise was also about MOOCs and how I think a lot of universities, and I didn't understand this to start with, I'll definitely confess that. I thought they were a bit of a sort of fad, whatever, but, because lots of the universities who were doing it were universities that you sort of think, why are they doing it? They've got no interest in online learning, really, like Melbourne, for argument's sake, or some of the others. But actually, they were onto something in the sense of what they were trying to do was learn about online learning, and I think they've learned a lot. And so again, I go back to the sort of the challenges, I think, of people in this space. We actually have to really get with the program. And I mean, your guidelines are a terrific practical resource in that way. So I thank you for developing that.
That's good to hear. Thanks very much.
Well, one of the questions I have was from a student's perspective in terms of your actual research findings and your sample of the students.
Yes.
It's just because we are actually dealing with a lot of undergraduate students who's not reached the 30s yet.
Oh, okay.
And I find on
Younger
Richard, who's I think 29 years of age, and we deal with a lot of undergraduate students who's not in that age. What do you? I do understand that mature age students is more or less more. There is a relationship between them and being more interested in learning, and. But do you think there's a difference? From your research findings, did you find any? First question: did you have any students under the age of, let's say, 23? And was that in tandem with the more mature age students?
Okay, thanks. No, that's a good question. Look at the research that both research findings with the online cohort. I think the youngest was about 22, 23. It's are you teaching undergraduate? Yeah, and you have a lot of students, younger students. Oh, that's interesting. So that's something that is changing, I think, because generally speaking, you know, in the experience of the research that I've done, they tend to be more mature age because the younger students often want the university experience. But of course, you know, I think that's a really interesting experience that you have, because there are so many students now who really can't afford to give up their jobs in order to go to university. So presumably most of these students are working. Yeah. Certainly the younger ones we did talk to, their experiences were similar, not exactly the same. In they tended to have fewer of the sort of caring responsibilities, less likely to have children, less likely to have you know, other caring responsibilities in other ways. My guess, and this is just a guess, and the disability people might, I'd be interested in their comments, my guess is that you may still have a fairly high level of disability type issues in the younger cohort, so students who, not just for work but for reasons of anxiety or so on, are not so keen to go on campus, so that could be something that would be a factor. But it's sort of watch this space, isn't it, to see how that develops in terms of younger students choosing to study online, because that hasn't traditionally been the case. Yeah. Anyone else got experience with that? Yeah.
No, I have a question.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
I think student disengagement is one of the most important challenges that we need to tackle. What are the qualities and features of a well-designed unit or course to overcome that issue? Because you mentioned that.
Yeah. Look, I'll run through some of that in the guidelines. What I haven't done in this research is to give a sort of blanket, this is how you do it. I've given examples of the way in which people are running engaging courses and units. But I suppose it's because I'm not the expert in that, but there are lots of people who are. So really my recommendations are about universities making sure that they consult with the people who are the experts within their universities on effective and engaging online design and teaching. And if they haven't got experts in that field, then they need to get some. It's about making sure that they do, because everywhere I went, there were people who knew how to do this and knew how to do this really well, but nobody was really asking them. They were busy doing their own courses and doing it well, but no one else on a broader scale in terms of the hierarchy were particularly interested. And there's so much information out there. I mean, they could look at some of the Open University in the UK courses and so on. So there's lots and lots of examples out there of how well it can be done. So my research is not prescriptive about this. It's about examples of some of the things that are happening and the fact that it does need to be, there need to be quality standards around online teaching and learning. Does that make sense? Okay. We've been here for an hour, so I think you should stretch your legs and grab a cup of tea or something and maybe just come straight back. We just take a 5-minute break. Is that okay?
Yeah, and if anyone's after the bathrooms, they're just at the end of this corridor here. Thanks, Cathy.
again. So. Okay. Everybody fed and watered and ready for a bit more? That's great. Thanks, all of you, and thanks for your thoughts so far on what we've covered. And I'm very pleased to hear that you find those findings that do resonate with you. Well, from the findings, I developed, as I said, this set of national guidelines for improving student outcomes in online learning. So the research findings informed the development of 10 guidelines for institutions. You have them in a handout there, that little form, which has a bit of a small summary about the actual research, the guidelines. So really what's on the slides is actually in your handout, so you can follow it as we go if you like. And I'll just run through them, and please stop me, ask questions as we go. The first guideline is about knowing the students, and these are guidelines aimed at institutions, so not at individuals particularly, although I hope that individuals will find them useful as well, but these are really aimed at an institutional level. So it's about the institution knowing who the students are and making sure that everyone else who needs to have contact with these students, whether it's teaching support, whether it's designing courses for them, knows about them too and knows a bit about who they are. So how do we translate this guideline into action? So if it's translated into action, what would it look like if this was happening in a university? There'd be an institutional understanding of the diversity of the online student cohort and how this may differ substantially from the on-campus cohort. There'd be demographic information available to people who are working with these students, just age, gender, equity status. There'd be other data available, such as anything that the university has really about online students could be made available more easily to staff. Student satisfaction reports could be available on the learning. All this could be available on the learning platform dashboard, available for the teaching staff and support staff. The staff intranet could have information about the online cohort and able to be further interrogated. And there'd be data and analytics staff working with faculties and schools and services to assist with interpreting this data. And as I say, this is happening to some extent in some places, but not in a general way, except at the Open University in the UK, where all this does happen. So all these references are there in your handout, but there are lots of other things to look at too, and my full set of references is in the report, which you'll find, the full report which you'll find online. But these are just a couple of examples with someone, Bart Rinties from the Open University UK. Mike Kent here in Australia did a great report a couple of years ago on access and barriers to online education for people with disabilities. So it's really about getting an understanding of this cohort and, generally speaking, the diversity that is contained within it. The second guideline is about quality standards for online education, so that when people are asked to put something online, or this course could also be online, so do this as well, there are standards for this, and these are institutionally known, and they're continually improved, and they're resourced. So it's about developing, implementing and continuously improving institution-wide quality standards for online education. So at an institution that has these, there'd be quality online education would be viewed as central to the institution's core business. There'd be a senior level institution-wide approach to the development of these standards, and there'll be consultation with experts, relevant stakeholders, people who are doing the work in the university, and other research evidence. And so often things happen at a senior level and they never sort of get implemented across the university. So there needs to be strategy leaders or champions at different levels, executive levels, faculty levels, school levels, to take responsibility for and oversee the development, the dissemination, the implementation of these standards. And they need to be embedded within the institutional strategic plan so that quality online education is brought to the centre of core business. Obviously, if a university isn't running online education, well, that's fine. They don't have to do any of this. But if they're going to do it, then they need to do it well. I don't know if any of you have come across this, but Mitch Parcell, 2 or 3 years ago, developed some standards for online education. He did this as part of an OLT project. They're really good, really comprehensive, and they're really worth looking at because they're very much, again, they're very practical and they're very detailed. So someone was asking me before what needs to be in a good online course, and Mitch's standards really cover all that very clearly. So it's worth looking at. The Open University UK as well on its website has a lot of information. It has some quality and standards fact sheets where it goes through what their standards are. The third one is about intervening early so that we do address those student expectations, build their skills and their student engagement. So what would this look like? There needs to be clear information to prospective students on the website, prospective student advisors who are available to speak to them on the phone, give them realistic information, online tools, quizzes, games, readiness questions. Some places have this, but they're a bit buried in the website sometimes. Some students are don't really know about it. So again, it needs to be upfront and clear because things like quizzes and readiness tools and so on can be really helpful because then they get a response that says, okay, these are some of the things you need to do to prepare for online study. I'm a great advocate for this, and a lot of people I spoke to were of some accessibility to free online academic preparation for these students. And this needs to be recommended and encouraged. There are some around in the form of MOOCs, so each university doesn't need to reinvent the wheel if they don't want to. Most universities do want to because they want to have their own brand on it. But this is where, I mean, my research didn't look at MOOCs as such. The online students, the online teaching and learning I was looking at was not MOOCs. But MOOCs can be useful in terms of this kind of academic preparation. So that really needs to be encouraged and needs to be available and free. Otherwise, so many students will not do it. There needs to be personal contact made with new online students, and that can happen via a range of media through the orientation activities, peer mentoring programs and so on. Some universities are offering face-to-face orientation activities for their online students, offered at different times, in different ways, in different locations. Charles Sturt does a lot of outreach orientation. Charles Darwin University does the same, where they literally get in cars and go out to remote locations where they will hold orientation sessions. But generally speaking, the online orientation component needs to be very strong. So these are examples. The outreach team, the Charles Sturt University one that I mentioned is the last one. But in terms of online academic skills preparation, there are free courses. There was one through OUA. I hesitate to say whether it's still there or not because I've heard that perhaps it's not, so I'd need to check that. But the University of Newcastle has a survival skills for online students, I think it's called it. It's like a mini MOOC, and it's free, and it's there on the University of Newcastle website. And I know one university doesn't like to recommend people go to another university's website, which I understand, but I guess I just use those as illustrations that they're there, they're available, and it's a pity if students don't know about them or aren't informed about them. The fourth one is about this teacher presence, explicitly valuing and supporting, and that includes resourcing, this vital role of teacher presence. So how would this look like? Teachers would be trained, supported and resourced so that they can create an obvious, supportive and professional presence within their online classroom. So they need to have sufficient teaching time allocated to them. They need to have the appropriate technology, and they need training in the appropriate technology so that they can develop an interactive learning experience to connect the students, not just with themselves. Initially, that's what the students tend to want, but also with fellow students, because it's that peer-to-peer learning that's so important as well. As we know with on-campus students, that's terribly important, the friendships that students make on campus. And a lot of people who studying online will say, oh, you know, I don't really care about meeting other students, but in fact the learning can be very much enriched by that. But the staff need to be sufficiently resourced with time and technology to be able to make that happen. Yeah. Yes, please. Please do. Sometimes I get on a roll.
The idea of teacher presence, it seems that you're... Do I need the mic? It seems to me that the idea of teacher presence in your work here is being conflated with the idea of the online teacher, and I'm wondering if they're not two distinctly different things. That the teacher presence is actually everything you're talking about, the design, the policies, the framework. And if we talk about teacher present as the teacher, it's always workload models, it's always going back to the teacher needs to do this, and the teacher needs to do this, and the teacher is failing in this. So I'd like to reconceptualise teacher presence as everything you've got under all the other points. With teacher presence, what is it we're trying to get there? And I think it's the online learning, and teacher presence would also be the students interacting with the teacher. And I want to move away from...
I really like that.
I want to move away from the teacher. The online
I really
teacher.
like that, and I think I like that reframe very much. And I think that actually gets to the essence of what I do mean, and I think you've articulated it really well, because that makes absolute sense. So thank you for that. Because you're right, it is about that. It's about, because the student doesn't, and this is what a lot of online teachers said to me, the student doesn't need to be in contact with the teacher every day. The teacher presence is there as in everything that happens within that course. That's right. Yeah, thank you. I like that. I'm going to pinch that. But I will say, one of my participants in one of my workshops said this. Okay, so these are some of the things that need to happen within the classroom, and whether that's done by the teacher or by the course design, which involves other people working on that, is welcoming students through personal introductions, being responsive on discussion boards, providing timely feedback, setting inclusive and relevant learning activities and assessments, generating peer interaction over learning tasks, including the use of learning tools, assisting with problems, referring to correct support. These are just examples from all the people I spoke with. And there are lots more ideas, and these are just a couple of examples, one by Senora Moore, looking at teacher presence in the Swinburne OUA units, which I thought was a particularly relevant paper. And then online, on the web, there's something from Charles Darwin University. I think I've given probably a more detailed reference to that in the guidelines that you've got of letting students know you're there. This one's about designing for online. And, a lot of people said to me, if we design for online first and foremost, it's a lot easier to kind of make that fit a classroom setting than the other way around. So everything that's designed for teaching, if the university offers online, then it makes sense to design it with online first in mind, because even if this course is not online at the moment, it's likely to end up to be there at some point. So think about designing for online is the recommendation. Adhering to the quality standards that I talked about before. It needs to be inclusive and accessible for all students. And there needs to be that consistent and intuitive structure to the learning platform across the institution. One of the things that I used to find at OUA was that students would be completely derailed by just having worked out how one learning platform worked. And then they did another unit. It may have even been the same university, but it just all was so different that they thought, oh, I can't do this again. It was so hard to learn it last time. I can't keep making these changes. So, I think a lot of universities now are really starting to look at a more consistent and intuitive structure across whether it's Moodle or Blackboard or whatever platform they use. So it has a similar look and feel across the board. And the content needs to be designed to encourage that online engagement and interactivity. So here's some examples of purpose-made short videos with captions, designing tasks that encourage communication, collaboration, online tools to provide both synchronous and asynchronous activities. All students will use the asynchronous activities. They're all learning asynchronously. But synchronous has an important place as well, was basically the message that was coming across and that I'm wanting to put across with this, that there will be a minority of students who will participate in the synchronous activities, the Adobe Connect and so on, but for that minority it will be really important. So sometimes online teachers would get discouraged by the... Yep?
Yeah, I guess I was going to raise that point that a lot of staff push back and go, well, I put these, synchronous sessions in, but I had no one show up, or I had two students show up, and it's not worth my time.
Yeah, that's right, and I think that is the issue, that sometimes only a few students turn up, and for those few students though, it can be very, very important, so it's a matter of working out the balance. But it's the asynchronous that probably is going to bring all the students together. Yeah.
But, and recording something like that turns it into an artifact for everyone else to use. So even though two people show up, it still becomes a...
Yes, that's right. And many students may then log in and use it if it's something that's engaging enough for them to just sit and listen to. Yeah. Okay. But asynchronous activities, I learnt from all the people I spoke to, and I'm sure you know this, can be designed in a very engaging way. Information needs to be presented in multiple ways, not just in one way. So not just a synchronous thing, not just an asynchronous thing, not just a quiz, but something else as well. So that and provision for students to move at their own pace. And some people would advocate, and I think it probably depends on the course, that all the material is there for the students to be able to just work their way through. Some release it week by week. It's worth thinking about. Yeah.
I was just going to say too, I think you need to think about peer-generated resources, like, for example, at the start of some unit, why don't you all contribute to a glossary, put content marks, stuff like that, and really use that online space.
Yes.
Then there's a permanent record, it's there.
Yeah, fantastic. All those things, that's right, to help engage and bring those students into the discussion. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. And assessments that are relevant, relatable, and use different media. So it's this is just one reference that was a really interesting one that I thought. It's looking at the Bachelor of Dementia Care at UTAS, and the design, the way in which the content is designed to teach something that's quite difficult to teach online, in a way that's engaging and interesting. The sixth one is about engaging and supporting through the curriculum, the content and delivery, which is similar to the designing for online, but it's designing for online, but it extends on that. So what does this look like? This means that staff would be regularly, would have training, would have staff training and development, and this would be ongoing and regularly updated, including sessional staff. And one of the things I found among sessional staff was a level of frustration that they get no training unless they turn up to it in their own time. They're not paid to go to staff development. That may vary, but certainly most of the people I spoke with, and I spoke with a lot of sessional staff, that any staff development they might go to, they have to go to in their own time. So those sorts of things are difficult. Teaching staff need to be kept up to date with practical resources, guides, so that teachers can engage and support students through these sorts of things. And again, they're just examples. The engaging and relevant content, the mixture of approaches and the different technologies, giving timely, constructive and specific feedback, helping students communicate and collaborate through collaborative tasks, just as your example was, and also to help develop informal peer support opportunities by encouraging the use of social media. Someone mentioned before about students setting up Facebook sites, and sometimes that's frowned upon, but sometimes that's really encouraged. And it seemed that where the academic staff were encouraging that, it was a more productive social media experience, because it was something in a way that was sanctioned, so it became a positive thing that they were getting ideas from there from their course around how they might use an informal social media site to generate discussion among themselves. They will want to do that. They will want to have their own space where they can talk to each other. This is a great guide. This just came out earlier this year, this guide to fostering asynchronous online discussion. It was from the University of Newcastle. I really recommend that because, again, it's very, very practical. Lots and lots and lots of really practical examples about how to develop really engaging asynchronous online discussion. And then there's an article by Devlin and McKay about teaching students using technology. These are just examples, as I say, for more ideas. And then the seventh one is about the collaboration, building collaboration across campus to deliver a holistic experience, one that's integrated and embedded so that support is embedded and it delivers support to students when it's needed. And what this would look like, this would mean that academic and professional staff are collaborating to embed support into the curriculum at the point of need. So academic skills embedded within beginning units and modules. Early assessment tasks to assist students to develop academic literacy skills. Online workshops, I was just hearing about some workshops that you're offering. Available, encouraged, and with links to them embedded at various points in the curriculum, and other support services, including disability services, easily accessed remotely through a variety of technologies. And the important thing is for academic staff to know about the support services and refer appropriately, because often the first point of contact for the student is to say something to their lecturer. And support services can be promoted in a myriad of ways, on the learning platform, embedded in course content at relevant points, and so on. And there needs to be after hours and extended hours support offered at times students are more likely to be studying. Some universities are using an external, like contracting out after hours support that's offered then by various technology, phone, Skype, asynchronous live chat, things like that too. And so it doesn't all have to be done in-house. And the Open University has a really good example of where they have redesigned, they restructured the whole place so that the teams, they talk about curriculum-based student support teams. So student support aren't separate from the schools and departments, but basically people are within curriculum-based teams. The academic and support professional staff are together in curriculum-based teams. And as a result, and they've had that for the last 2 years, and I spoke to a lot of people at the OU, and not one person was negative about it. Everyone was very positive about it. Partly because they as staff had learnt so much about what each other does and were able to so easily then link what they were doing together, and it just was really making sense. I don't think that's something that's easily achieved. In fact, they would tell you that because it as I say, that their external online studies is very much their core business. They don't do any face-to-face other than some of their residentials and so on. So for our universities to completely restructure in that way, I think is well nigh impossible. But nevertheless, we can still learn something from that level of collaboration by some of the things that are happening, like student advisors working within schools and all those sorts of things. The eighth one is about contacting and communicating throughout the student journey. And again, this would mean that there'd be an online student intervention strategy developed and implemented collaboratively between academic, student support, data analysis staff, so working together, so that there's a comprehensive institutional framework of interventions. So these are examples as to what it might look like. Personalised messages, synchronous and asynchronously delivered, designed and scheduled to target particular students or cohorts. Students, part of it would be students regularly and clearly advised about crucial dates, what these mean. Each student receives only messages relevant for them, as we talked about before. The messages are personalised based on students' activity and behaviour, tailored to their needs at particular points in time. And it tells them that the university knows who they are, is interested in them as an individual, and is actively seeking to provide them with relevant and timely support. This is not something, by the way, that would be done by each individual teacher, in case you're thinking, oh God, I'd never have time to do that. This requires an institutional strategy. And then the 9th one follows on from that, about making strategic use of learning analytics in order to target and personalise these student interventions. So there needs to be this collaborative approach towards developing a learning analytics strategy, consultation with staff, deciding what to ask of the data, how to make the best use of the answers, to engage and involve the teaching and support staff, because you're the ones who know what's needed and what you need to know, rather than it all happening somewhere else and then it just being foisted on you. And then the data can be used to build predictive models, to target interventions towards those most likely to need them, can be used to inform the student communication intervention strategy, and it can be used to personalise the interventions. So content can be tailored, learning activities can be based on learning engagement and achievements. And some of these, some of the people working in the data analysis field have some fantastic ideas. There are some, and I think that it's harnessing those skills so that working with you as the ones working directly with the students can develop a very engaging and effective student intervention strategy. So there's a lot of information on this in things like the Horizon report, the GIST report. There are some other references, I think, in the guidelines, but also in the full report. Does anyone have much to do with learning analytics here? Much experience of it? Or yep, a couple of people. But it tends to happen, as I say, over there in some other section of the university, whereas it does need to be, again, joined up. Because I actually don't know how they can develop it without talking to people working with the students. And last but certainly not least is about investment. This is about the resourcing. So if it's going to be done well, institutions need to invest in online education to ensure both access and opportunity. It can't just happen as a sideshow. So how's that going to happen? It's only going to happen if the institution regards online education as core business and invests in it accordingly. So it needs to be, teaching needs to be recognised appropriately in the academic workload model. There needs to be consultation with experienced academic staff to set benchmarks for things like realistic online class sizes, and that will vary from course to course. The paid hours required for sessional staff in order for effective teaching and support to happen. I mean, does anyone ever ask you, how many hours do you think this particular course might need if delivered online? So these are the things that really do need to happen. And programs that are known to improve student engagement, satisfaction, retention, academic success need to receive dedicated ongoing funding. One of the people I spoke to had won an award for a program which was a student engagement program because it had done so well and because it was achieving such great results. And this university award had been given to this staff member who'd set up this program. But it didn't have dedicated funding. It was relying on HEP funding in order to run it year to year. So each year she did not know whether she was going to be able to run it next year. So on the one hand, the university was saying, this is fabulous, you're fabulous for doing it, but well, we're not going to give it any money, you just have to keep on applying for HEP funding. So, those sorts of things are really quite problematic. And investment needs to be made in technology improvements. I mean, we know technology is improving all the time. The learning platforms, learning design, learning tools, data analytics, so that we can continue to deliver engaging and a positive online student experience, that it can continue to improve. And as a result, with those sorts of things happen, student retention, completion in online courses and programs will be improved. Gilly Salmon wrote a great paper on a transformative framework for institutions, which is just one look at some of the challenges for institutions in trying to change the way in which online education is managed and run. Okay, so that's my report, that's my findings, that's the guidelines, and I shouldn't really say they're mine because they're not mine. They belong to all the people who contributed to the research, and people that I have presented it to have sort of added to the ideas, like yours, with the teacher presence being more than the teacher, but definitely a broader concept. So there's just time now for any further discussion or questions or any thoughts about that. Yeah, I might use the microphone again. It's just that it's being recorded, so I think possibly for the recording it might help if other people want to listen to it.
I was just wondering, with your research,
Yep.
it's relatively easy to sign up to online courses.
Yes.
It's almost targeting people that are somewhat vulnerable. They're not
Yes.
unintelligent, but they just want to change their lives.
Yes.
What indication do you have, if any, that anything we do is going to keep these people in the course once they realise how hard it is?
I think that if we're more realistic with the messages we give about online teaching, or online learning, online education, and what is going to be expected of them and what they need to be able to do and what they need to be able to commit to, then fewer of those students may enrol in the first place. I mean, I'm not saying we want to put students off, but on the other hand, we want to give them a realistic idea of what's involved. So, one of the people I interviewed talked about sort of ads for a particular university online courses, whatever it was, where, shots of young people on their mobile phones on the bus on the way to work with the caption, study anywhere, anytime. Well, if it's so unrealistic to think that you can do a university degree on your mobile phone on the way to work. And we all know this, and you kind of assume that other people will know this, but there may be a lot of people who actually don't know this, who've had no experience of university and think, if I could do it on my way to work, and that would be good. And I think that while guidelines are always given about, I know at OUA it was like 10 hours per week per unit and all this sort of thing. But I don't know how strongly those messages are given, and I think that the emphasis is often on sales. I'm talking generally now, broadly. The emphasis is on signing students up rather than having a conversation with a student and putting out messages about the realistic expectations. But I think there's always going to be a certain level of attrition. I mean, that's bound to happen. But I think it can be reduced considerably by all these sorts of things, and the realistic expectations is a part of it. Yeah, I'll just get the mic. Maybe pass it down. Thank you.
Hi. I come from a school that has 100% international students, and they come here to Melbourne. We teach mostly face-to-face, but we're beginning to offer online alternatives.
Right.
And these are students that are in Melbourne, but because they do a lot of work.
Yes.
And actually, it's quite attractive to them, considering that they work, and this can give them more time to work.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course, some of them are already beyond the legal parameters, but anyway, that's not our problem. But see, the thing is, it's so attractive that, again, I was beginning to say about this license to disengage.
Yes.
So they go in there thinking, online I can do this anytime, etc.
Yes.
So we find that we've in fact had this situation where they enrolled in an online class, and they got a question from a student, where's the lecturer? When am I going to go to class? So complete misunderstanding of what online is. So what we've done is we're trying giving a prerequisite. In other words, we're not going to allow all the students to enroll in particular subjects, and we've actually put in a prerequisite that's a little bit tougher than a face-to-face, because we're looking for students that are more self-disciplined, perhaps, and blocking those that we know are just there so that they can do more work. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on that. Is that something
Look, I think in a situation like that, where it's international students coming to the country in order to study, that may be a perfectly reasonable way to go. Overall, in terms of domestic students, I would hate to see universities making it tougher to enrol in online courses than face-to-face, because for the very reason, in terms of it has helped to widen access and participation for, you know, less advantaged groups. So you wouldn't want to make it harder for them to enrol. But I think it's that, you know, it comes back, doesn't it, to the whole issue that we were talking about before of expectations and information and so on. And I know it used to happen when I was working at OUA that students would say, well, when do I get my course materials? They seem to think they turn up in the post. So, you know, we need to be better at informing students. And I think if there's a system of regular contact and communication, some of those things are going to be alleviated. I mean, there's always going to be the odd student who just doesn't get it no matter what. We can't fix everything. But we can certainly do a better job, I think, than is currently done in a lot of the time by being much more informative and just making much more effort to stay in regular contact. I think it's becoming something that a lot of places, a lot of universities are looking at doing now, of trying to start a sort of regular communication with the student right from the moment of enrolment. UNE has just developed an online orientation program where they will connect with the students right from the time that they enrol. So they're not going to wait till late February to sort of contact them, or even mid-February. Right from sort of December onwards, they're sort of staying in contact with those students. So I think that you know, that's bound to diminish the number of students who haven't got a clue by the time they start. Yeah, but it's an interesting concept, and I think that it's probably a perfectly reasonable way to go when international students are coming in on visas to study. Yeah.
Well, to start with, our completion pass rates aren't fantastic, and our fear is the online might just make it worse, and it just doesn't make sense.
And it may well. That's right. When you look at the stats I had before,
46%.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, down here. Just thanks. There you go.
I'm wondering how did you run that online orientation? How did you do?
Oh, okay. Well, we ran one at OUA. It was short video clips and so on, and information to students about it, ask them to log into it. The one that University of New England is doing, it's you know, it's just on the website, and it's very interactive. There's lots of quizzes and games, but they make contact with the students very early on from the time of enrolment, and are pushing them to that site all the time. And it's one of those self-paced type orientations where they can dip into this or they can dip into that. They can go through checklists, and which takes them to other links. So it is very thorough and comprehensive. Yeah.
Is it mandatory?
It's not mandatory. I mean, I think it's very hard to make orientation mandatory. But the mandatory aspect is one example that is interesting, because one example I remember someone that one of the online teachers that I spoke with, who made it mandatory that at the very first content that students had to go through was a readiness quiz. And basically, then that teacher would know who she's got and what sort of challenges are ahead, and was able to then basically, the students would get information from that readiness quiz about what they needed to do, but it gave that teacher information as well. So those sorts of mandatory things can happen once they're in class, but I think it's hard to make orientation mandatory, but on the other hand, it can be encouraged much more than we do, I think. Yeah. It can be made to sound almost mandatory, I think. Okay, I'm just aware of the time, and I think we probably should finish up, and thank you so much for not just listening but contributing. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too.
So I wasn't standing to finish you up.
No,
I was
but I
actually
think we should.
standing up so that I could help you with the mic. So.
Oh, right. Oh, that was nice.
All right. So the first thing I've got to do is apologise for welcoming you to Swinburne, because.
What did you do that?
I think I did.
I didn't notice.
Good, excellent.
I'm sure you said ACU.
Anyway, it's ACU, and I really would like to thank you very much for coming, but thank you very much to ACU, to Theda, who I can't see at the moment, so she's obviously out there replenishing our refreshment. Oh, there you are, thank you. And to Lorraine for being incredibly helpful and helping us organise the venue and the lovely catering